Hi everyone, Professor King here. In this video, I'm going to be discussing style in arguments. So in the same way that we kind of like have certain styles in the way we dress, our writing has to have a particular style. In other words, it follows these unspoken or previously agreed upon conventions of appearing a certain way so that we express ourselves to our audience, to our readers in the best way we possibly can. So I'll take it to a share screen in a moment. As always, if you have questions, make sure to email me, to Canvas message me, or to meet me via my Zoom office hours. If you need to pause during the video, make sure that you pause and take notes and reflect however best you take down these notes. So I'll take it to the share screen. We'll go to the PowerPoint. If there's any barking in the background, it'll be my dogs. Sorry. So chapter 13 of Everything's an Argument talks about style in argument. And when we're talking about style, again, we're talking about the conventions on the page, how things look, how they read, how they sound when we read either aloud to ourselves or read in our heads. All of these things are important in terms of making sure that the writing on the page appears, sounds, reads as well as it can. So in terms of style and word choice, for academic arguments, use formal languages. You want to avoid slang, you want to avoid loaded terms, and you want to avoid terms that are too abstract or too general. So again, you have to think about the audience that you have. If we are in an academic setting in a college classroom, you don't want to use the same language that you would use hanging out with your friends or in the locker room talk, right? All of those sorts of things. You want to use language that's appropriate for an audience of academically minded peers. So that's why we don't use that informal language like slang, colloquialisms, etc. Instead, you want to use neutral language that has a controlled connotation. Connotation and denotation are ways of defining words. Denotation means like the literal dictionary definition, whereas connotation means all of the things emotional, contextual, etc., that we associate with a word, right? So, for example, the word extra. The denotation of extra just means additional, surplus. However, in 2021, the connotation of a word like extra would bring to mind thoughts of someone who is dramatic or who behaves or dresses or speaks in a very intense or wild manner. Someone who gets into a lot of arguments, something like that, right? That's the difference when we're talking about connotation versus denotation. You also want to use vivid, concrete, and specific words, right? It's not enough to tell your readers in your essay. You also have to show them with imagery, with illustrative language. You have to make sure that they can see what you're saying, that you invoke those five senses. And this great chart right here just gives some helpful reminders of if you're going to say an informal word like, say, kids, you can say children instead. You can find a more formal way of going about it. And a lot of people say, you know, if I try to do this while I'm writing, I get stuck. And what I always tell people is like, put the words on the page the way that they come out most quickly for you, so that you don't lose track of the ideas that are in your head. But then the second part that a lot of students forget to do is to then go back and revise and edit and proofread. And when you're revising, when you're editing, when you're proofreading, you want to look for all of that informal language, maybe highlight it or put a line through it, and then be able to come back and put a more academic formal word in there. And this chart just kind of helps you to do that. All right. Now let's talk about style in terms of sentence structure. in arguments. Varying your sentence length is effective, meaning if you're a person who tends to write very short, simple sentences, try to mix it up a little bit by adding some more complex or compound sentences in there. If you're a person who, like me, writes these like 6-line long sentences, maybe challenge yourself to simplify what you're saying at certain points so that your reader doesn't constantly feel like they're running a marathon trying to read these long verbose ideas that you've put on the page. And also use parallel structure. A lot of people are unfamiliar with what parallel structure is, even though we do it all the time. Parallel structure is using parallel nouns, parallel clauses, or parallel phrases in grammar. And so let's look at the example to the right. The sentence is, the boy is frolicking in the noonday sun, running through the water and looking at a girl down the way. That's one sentence. Now let's break this up. We have our subject, which is the boy. We have our verb, is. Then we have a parallel structure in 3 of gerundive phrases. ing, putting ing on a verb makes it a gerund. It kind of gives it noun-like qualities. So we have the gerundive phrase, or what we can call the gerund and the prepositional phrase, frolicking in the noonday sun, running through the water, and looking at a girl. So in each one of these instances, you have the verb with ing added, and then followed by a prepositional phrase, and it creates a rhythm, right? If you were to change one of these and make it not parallel to the other items going on in the sentence where it should be, then it would kind of fall apart. Like if I said, the boy is frolic in the noonday sun, running through the water and looking at a girl down the way, that wouldn't have the same rhythm or feeling as it would had I put that ing on frolicking. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about parallel structure. It's kind of like algebra, right? If it's here, then it, in this order, then it has to be here in this order. And then where we have the and, we know that that's the third in the list, right? So then the third one also has to be in the same order. Otherwise, it feels unbalanced, right? It feels clunky. The rhythm is not there. And so that's why parallelism is so important. It helps us as readers to follow the flow of what's being said. So now let's talk about punctuation. For those of you who are always sort of confused about punctuation or not quite sure where to use it, here's a very, very quick refresher. And if you want to do more research on any of these punctuation types or these words, you know, in your own time, do your own grammar refresher on these things. So the first one is semicolons. Semicolons connect 2 independent clauses that are linked by one idea. They signal a pause stronger than a comma, but not as strong as a period. Okay, now let me break down what that says for you. Semicolons. See this thing after idea? That's a semicolon. There's a reason why I put it in the definition. They are, like it says here, stronger than a comma, not as strong as a period. In other words, and they separate 2 independent clauses. And you might say, well, what's an independent clause? An independent clause is a clause that can stand on its own. Well, what's a clause? A clause is essentially, or an independent clause is essentially a sentence. It's got a subject and a verb. So an independent clause could be he runs, he being the subject, runs being the verb and the whole predicate. If you said in the middle of the night, he walks into a grocery store and buys everything off of the chips and candy aisle, that's still an independent clause. And you still have that same subject, he, and verb runs. But then you also have other parts to it, right? Anyway, if I said he runs, semicolon. He also likes to walk, period. That would be two independent clauses because you have a subject and a verb, and the clause can, both of those clauses can stand on their own, but they're part of a like-minded idea. So you don't necessarily have to separate them with a period. You can separate them with this semicolon here, like the one after idea. Dashes draw attention to relevant details like this. So a dash is often used for two main reasons, but there are other minor reasons why you can use them. They can draw attention to details like you're seeing here. They bring emphasis to a particular phrase. And the difference between a clause and a phrase is that a clause has a noun and a verb or a pronoun and a verb, whereas a phrase has only one or the other. It only has a noun or pronoun with other words involved, adverbs, adjectives, etc. But it doesn't have a verb. Or it can be a verb with adjectives and adverbs and all those other things. But if it has a noun with it or preceding it as a sort of subject, it's then a clause. So dashes draw attention to relevant details like this, right? They can also do one other thing, which is called appositives. And appositives are used when you are drawing attention to a specific item to give it more detail. So for example, if I use the sentence, in the short story, Sonny's Blues, James Baldwin discusses the effects of drug abuse on a particular individual. Sorry, one sec. Cool. Shh, quiet. Short story dash Sonny's Blues dash, right? That's what's called an appositive. It's still drawing attention to that particular short story, Sonny's Blues, to give us more description, to give us more detail of what we're talking about. So that's when you use dashes. Then we have colons. Unlike a semicolon, colons are the two dots, right? The reason why this is called a semicolon is because the bottom's not fully formed. It's got that part hanging off the bottom, right? A semicolon is those two fully formed circles, and they introduce explanation or examples. Just like in math, where a colon means that there is some sort of ratio or parallel relationship between the things on the left and the things on the right. A colon does something similar in writing. That's why a lot of people, when they're like, I'm a math person, I'm not a writing person. If you realized how much math was involved in writing in terms of balance and structure, you'd go, oh yeah, I actually can apply a lot of this, right? So for example, if I say something like, here is the 2021 Fullerton College football roster, colon, and then I list the names of all the athletes on the football roster, I'm saying roster equals or can be described by all of these names, right? So it's a way to introduce those explanations or examples. Like if we look at the next one, we have a colon right here. And again, on the left-hand side, the things to avoid using. And well, what are their actual real life parallels or examples? Text message punctuation, exclamation points, and question marks. These are things, so this will move me on to my next point. What are the things that we shouldn't use in academic writing? Well, text message punctuation. I hope she never sees this, but I did go to grad school with someone who, we had our final, and our final was like an in-class typed essay. We were in a computer lab and we're typing out these essays, much like any sort of in-class final. And at the end of this person's essay, she used an emoji. And this was in grad school, English literature, grad school. She used an emoji. And boy, if it was not the scandal of the collective nerds in that room, myself included, when we all saw her writing and leave an emoji at the end of it. These are people, we're people who are now, masters, in the process of becoming masters of the English language. And we saw that emoji and we were just all there was a very quiet but but noticeable gasp being used. Anyway, you don't want to use text message punctuation. You also don't want to use text speak, right? Gonna, wanna, what else have I seen? All kinds, like extra, you don't want to use that sort of text message slang. You don't want to use exclamation points. There's a really sort of well-known unattributable statement that goes along the lines of a period in academic writing will have the same effect as 3 exclamation points. Meaning, like, if what you're saying in the sentence is strong enough, why do you need the signaling punctuation to bring your point across, right? We're supposed to be speaking in these, calm, professional, academic tones. So we don't need we don't need the writing in all caps. We don't need the exclamation point because the point is being made. And also avoid using question marks. A lot of people like to do this. They love to ask that rhetorical question either in their intro or somewhere in a body paragraph, and avoid that at all costs, because there's another kind of famous saying, again, unattributable, or just an idea that, if you have to ask the question within an argument, you should already be in the process of answering it. Like, you don't want to leave, unless you're leaving it in your conclusion as that sort of like final flourish or flair. You really don't want to put a lot of rhetorical questions in academic writing because, from one person who's been doing this for a long time to a person who has also written a few papers in their lives, we all know that it's just to add space to the page, right? Like, so what does happen when climate change ruins our entire reality? Well, when climate change ruins our entire reality, blah, 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 right? Like, it's just a way to put words on the page and get the page count, and it's silly. So try to avoid those rhetorical questions. The next aspect of style we'll talk about are tropes. They involve a change in the order of or meaning of a word or phrase. And these are the types of tropes we have. We have metaphor, simile, analogy, understatement, and again, rhetorical questions. So metaphors, they clarify or enliven an argument by implying a comparison between two otherwise unlike things. I always call my dog Lionel the mayor of Long Beach. He's not literally the mayor of Long Beach, but when I say Lionel is the mayor of Long Beach, I'm using metaphor, right? I'm saying like when we go out and when he sees people, he like has to introduce himself and like sort of proverbially shake paws with whoever he meets, right? Like, so I call him the mayor of Long Beach because he's like got to know everybody. I'm using a metaphor to show that my dog is a very personable, outgoing, friendly dog. And that's how, right, I'm creating that comparison. Simile does something similar to metaphor, but you have to use the words like or as in your comparison. So if I were to say my dog Lionel is as friendly as the mayor of Long Beach, then that would be a simile because I said as friendly as. So, or my dog Lionel is friendly like the mayor of Long Beach, then that would be a simile because I use the word like. And I'm still creating a comparison between two usually unlike things to show some aspect or trait of one of them, or even both of them. All right, the next one is analogy. An analogy is an extended metaphor. It compares two things, but often point by point. So it's longer to show similarity or to imply further similarities beyond what is discussed. However, an analogy has to be held up to scrutiny, right? We've all seen when analogies can go wrong. Like if we think about comedy, right? And the sort of very delicate ground that is being tread right now in comedy, because we're definitely seeing a cultural shift in what we find acceptable and therefore what we find funny as a culture. So you'll see a lot of comedians being held accountable, being, dismissed, a cynical person would say being canceled, right? Because the analogies, the comparisons that they're using between social groups or between social groups and something else just isn't landing correctly. So that's what I say when I mean an analogy has to hold up to scrutiny. But the important thing to remember about an analogy is that it's long, right? Like when you see comedians sort of setting up a joke to compare two things, they don't usually just say, my dog is the mayor of Long Beach, right? They have to go into these sort of narratives or monologues in which the comparisons have multiple bullet points on the chart, so to speak. And they really are going into an extended discussion of how these things are similar or different. It's not just sort of like in one sentence or one phrase, the way that a metaphor or simile is. It's extended, it's long, it's in a paragraph or even a whole narrative. Understatement is using a quiet message to make its point, right? A lot of people know the term shade, right? Shade is kind of a form of understatement because we're not saying everything that needs to be said, because if we did, it would be overstatement, right? If we went too far and explained too much. Understatement is where we use less, but we make that same point, right? So, for example, if I were to say, I don't know, oh, like you're looking really nice today. That's a change. That's a form of understatement, because all the things that are packed within that are like, oh, you actually took the effort to look good today. Whereas most days you're just like a pathetic slob who shouldn't even be like terrifying the public with your image and presence, right? Like, so we're saying the same thing, but we're just using less words. We're using more neutral or subtle words to get the point across. And again, rhetorical questions. They're questions that don't require answers. And if they don't require answers, don't ask them in the body of an essay, right? Save them for that sort of like hooky conclusion of your essay where you're leaving readers on that last thought-provoking sort of idea, right? We also have schemes. Schemes are figures that depend on word order. I've already talked about parallelism, so I won't go into depth about that. But again, it's about using grammatically similar phrases or structures. But antithesis sort of inverts the order, right? It's using parallel structures to note contrast or opposition. Setting the word against the word is Shakespeare's description. Okay, so examples of antithesis. To err is human, to forgive divine. The antithesis there is that we're using antonyms, right? Err versus, well, not even necessarily antonyms, but items that stand in contrast. Erring versus forgiving, right? Stepping versus leaping for the next one. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Our government should work for us, not against us. It should help us, not hurt us, right? The antithesis there is for, not against, help, not hurt, right? So we're setting up, again, these parallel structures to note contrast or opposition. John F. Kennedy had a few famous ones of this, right? Let both sides explore what problems unite us instead of belaboring those problems which divide us. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country, right? Like, again, we're sort of setting up parallel inversions, I guess we can call them, through antithesis to show contrast, right? But also to show comparison. And I guess that is that, as they say. Again, if you have questions or if anything comes up, feel free to contact me in all the ways I always mention how. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'll see you all in cyberspace, hopefully sooner rather than later. Bye.